What's up guys, HCG here, welcome back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck of the Day. The ban list dropped and oh boy, what a ban list did we just get. Konami knew that they had to make something very impactful in order for players to drive away from the Master Duel hype and actually make us interested again for the DCG, and they did just that. This ban list was one of the most game-changing ban lists that we've ever gotten. They hit so many good decks and they gave life to other decks that were already really good or decks that were just completely off the table. So now we're going to update so many different stuff, and I think that we're going to start with probably the deck that got the most significant boost out of any deck that got a boost out of this ban list, and this deck is Eldlich. Now, Eldlich is one of those decks that people were already playing, and now with 3 copies of Skill Drain, which is something that I'm pretty sure nobody ever saw coming unless we just got used to it because of Master Duel. We were playing with 3 copies of Skill Drain, and now we're actually going to see the impact this is going to have in the TCG as well. So I'm not exactly sure how much of an impact this will make, but for Eldlich specifically, this is going to be huge, just because this deck does not care whatsoever about Skill Drain. It plays under it perfectly, and yeah, it's going to make all the other decks have a very hard time dealing with it. So the first deck we're going to update is of course Eldlich, but if you want to see any other deck updated that got a change from the ban list, then stay tuned, we're going to update most of them. So now, before we begin with the video, if you enjoyed, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and now let's get to the deck profile. So starting off with the monsters, we play 3 copies of Eldlich the Golden Ore. Now, the reason you will need to play 3 copies of Eldlich this format is because people are going to expect this deck a lot more than before. You're going to see them main decking cards like Diddy Crow, Ice Dragon's Prison, and even in the mirror match you're going to see maxing out on Hakueros, so Eldlich is going to get banished a lot. And if you play only 2 copies of Eldlich, if you lose both copies, then you have basically lost the entire game because there's nothing you can do without Eldlich. So you need to max it out, and even though it is going to be a bit bricky sometimes, it's a necessary evil in order to be able to fight the grind game, because you are playing a grind game deck. You're not going to OTK your opponent with Eldlich, so you need to be able to grind it out, and if they start banishing your Eldlich from the graveyard, then yes, you're going to have a very hard time coming back, because without this card, the deck does basically anything, because it's the only way to deal a lot of damage very quickly. Now, the only monster we play in the deck is 2 copies of King of the Heavenly Prison. This card is very useful, especially just because you are playing 26 trap cards. You can play even more if you want, because I do play a lot of draw power in the deck, but other people are not going to be able to afford cards like Prosperity, so they're going to choose to play even more traps in this build. So this card is very useful. Again, it was useful before, but because people are going to start expecting this deck a lot more, and not just this deck, they're going to expect more stun version of decks like True Draco with 3 skill drains. People are just going to start playing more stun decks than before, so you're going to see cards like Feather Duster in the main deck, maybe Twin Twisters, and all those good cards. Twin Twisters is not the greatest against this deck, but still, it can hurt if your opponent cannot TK you before you can get a chance to float with your trap cards. So Heavenly Prison not only is going to protect your back row, but it's also going to give you a beater on the field and another back row you can use. So yep, this card is absolutely ridiculous in any type of deck, and you don't really need to max it out, because unlike Eldlich, this card can be a huge brick sometimes, because the problem is that this card can actually be useful a lot more when your opponent does have the back row removal. Of course, by just revealing it, you will be able to special summon it and then get another trap card, but the thing is that if you don't open too many back rows, sometimes having multiple monsters or multiple spell cards then can be a little bit hurtful, especially for a deck like this, which relies solely on its trap cards. Eldlich is just a beater, and it's only good, the value of it going second, just because you're just going to discard a card, then send a card to the graveyard, and then bring it back and get rid of another monster. But still, you don't need to play more than 5 monsters in a deck like this. I've seen people play Lava Golem instead of Heavenly Prison. I think this is much better suited for the side deck, especially because Drytron got hit again, and with banned Eva, I'm not sure exactly how the deck is going to function and if people are going to choose to play it, so I'm not sure if Lava Golem is main deck worthy. And same thing with Littlest Brigade. The deck got severely hit, so people they're going to move to Sword Soul more likely than not, so this is why this card is not really main deck worthy. But Heavenly Prison, definitely you need to play it in the main deck in order to make sure your plays get protected. For the spell cards, we have 3 copies of Cursed Eldland. This card is really good, especially with Enforcer, just because if your opponent pops this with Enforcer, then they're basically not gaining anything, because you're going to be able to send another card to the graveyard. So as long as Enforcer is out and Destiny Fusion got semi-limited, which is not gonna change much, trust me, because yes, people will hard draw it less often, but Anaconda is still a thing, so they're going to use it very, very often, very consistently. So Cursed Eldland, some people have cut it, but I think that this card, just because of the existence of Phoenix Enforcer, it's a card that is definitely worth running, at least for now. If Fusion Destiny gets banned eventually, like it did in the OCG, then yes, you can argue cutting this card, but still, I think for now, it's a card that you need to play, because it gives you insurance against a pop type of card like Enforcer. We play 1 copy of Elixir of White Destiny. This is here for the grind game, because once you run out of your Sanguines, this card can really help you, because bringing back your Eldlich from the graveyard can sometimes be crucial during the very grind game, and you only have 3 Sanguines, and you're going to grind a lot. Sometimes you can win without using all 3, but there will be a lot of games where you'll be using all 3 of them, so you need to be able to bring back Eldlich again, especially during your opponent's turn, because you can always bring Eldlich during your own turn from the graveyard by using its own effect, but when you want to use cards like Yugioh Era and Conquistador, and if your opponent gets rid of Eldlich before you can do that, then this card can help you get it back from the graveyard. So I think just 1 copy is good enough, because you can set it whenever you want with your golden trap cards. So yeah, you have access to it whenever you want, and it's a really good card just as a one-off. It's not going to be bricky, because you're not going to see it very often if you play it at 1. And for the rest of the spell cards, we just have the pot cards. You don't need to play any other spell card in the deck. We have 3 copies of Pot of Extravagance. Self-explanatory. In any trap deck, getting this +1 is very, very important, which is why I'm playing 3 Extravagance and only 2 copies of Prosperity, because yes, Prosperity is going to give you the card you need, but especially now that you have 3 copies of Skill Drain, you don't really need to dig for it that much in order to see it, because it's a 3, you're going to see it a lot more often than before. But the reason you're playing both of them is because you're not going to draw both of them every single time, so you need at least 1 in your hand to make sure you have the appropriate trap card in order to be able to counter the matchup. And of course, you have to activate Extravagance first, but if your opponent ashes Extravagance, then you can activate Prosperity, so it's a win-win sometimes, even if you drop both. For the trap cards, we have, of course, 3 copies of Scarlet Sanguine. Self-explanatory. This card is absolutely busted. You just get out your Eldritch on the deck or your graveyard, you float into other traps, pretty good. We play 3 copies of Conquistador, another card that you have to absolutely play at 3. It's the pop card, and of course, these monsters get you to Pleiades, which is another form of disruption and another form of being able to go for more damage. And now we're playing 3 copies of Yugioh Era. Now, you can consider playing 2, but the thing is that I mentioned before that people are going to start playing this deck a lot more than before. Yes, it lost Imperial Order, but the thing is that Imperial Order was a one-off, that it was only good going first. Skill Drain is now at 3, but it's also a great card going second, especially when you combine it with cards like Torrential Tribute, Needle Sealing, or Solemn Strike, and anything like that. You can crack boards with Skill Drain, which is why it's much better than Imperial Order in this deck, even though Imperial Order is an auto-win against certain decks, but so is Skill Drain, to be honest. So people are going to start playing Eldlich a lot more often than before. And when that happens, Yugioh Era is going to be an absolute must at 3, just because, like I said, some people they're going to play 2 Eldlich, and if you can just banish them with Yugioh Era, and you have this 1 extra Eldlich in your deck left, then you absolutely win, because without Eldlich in the mirror match, you cannot do anything. In any matchup, you can't do anything without Eldlich, so this is why this card is going to be an absolute must at 3. And it's not even a bad card, because even if in a matchup where you actually don't really need to use its banishing effect, the thing about this card is that it's just like Conquistador. You can actually activate Torrential Tribute and demand whenever you want, even if you let your opponent do absolutely anything, and you summon this during the battle phase, and then use Torrential, so you can activate it whenever you want, and it also floats, so you don't really care, even if the banishing effect is completely irrelevant against a certain matchup you're playing. And also, there are other decks that are going to be more relevant than before. For example, decks like Salamangreat got a boost, and Yugioh Era is really good against that deck. Fairy Tail Snow came back from the ban list, and guess what? Yugioh Era can force your opponent to activate Snow twice if they can in order to special summon it, because they will need to banish like 14 cards or something like that in order to be able to summon her for the Chain Link 3. So yeah, this card is absolutely ridiculous against a lot of cards that came out of the ban list that are going to see a lot of play, especially at the beginning of the format. Then maybe afterwards, yes, some decks are not going to be as relevant as people think that they are right now just by looking at the ban list. But yeah, this card is going to get a lot of value, especially in the beginning of the format. Now, for the rest of the traps, we have 3 copies of Skill Drain, fresh off the ban list. Who would have thought that this would actually happen? I'm sure that a lot of people were just debating if Max C was going to come back just because of Master Duel, but nobody was talking about Skill Drain, just Max C, because Max C is always the notorious debate that pretty much splits the entire community in half. Some people think that it should come back to 3, some people think that just absolutely stay banned forever. But Skill Drain is a card that we knew the OCG had at 3 for a long time, but we never thought it was actually going to happen here. And now that it did, a lot of people are going to be happy, because a lot of people are enjoying decks like Eldlich, and I know that there are a lot of true Draco players out there that have just been begging for more cards, and even though they did not get any of their specific cards back, 3 copies of Skill Drain definitely helps, because this card against a lot of decks, it's auto win. Even if you're playing decks like Dark Magician or Blue Eyes, even old school people can rejoice, because if you're playing a beater deck, this card can win you games on its own, which is absolutely insane. This card is basically free, and your opponent cannot use any of their monster effects. And because we're going to enter a format where Sword Soul is going to be basically the most prominent deck you have to beat, this card against Sword Soul is just insta-win. Your opponent cannot do anything unless they're maining back or removal, and cards like this being in the format at 3 is going to basically force people to play back or removal in the main deck if they want to play combo type decks. So yeah, decks like Eldlich, they can play this card without giving up anything, and they can basically outright win. We also play 3 copies of Gozen Match. This card, especially now, is going to be really good in the main deck, just again because of Sword Soul, because people are going to play it. They lost Protoss, which yeah was a good hit because this card was absolutely unhealthy, but the thing is that the deck didn't lose anything consistency-wise. It just lost a power play, but it can do basically everything else in the same consistency that it could before. And cards like Gozen Match can stop your opponent's turn if you're playing Sword Soul, and against other decks it's going to be very useful. And the thing about these two floodgates is that, unlike Imperial Order, which we're not playing of course because it got banned, they're really good going second. You do play a lot of other good cards going second, and Conquistador with Sanguine is also good going second. So basically what you want, especially with your main deck, is to be able to use all your trap cards in a way to break boards, because maining board breakers aside from trap cards is not very optimal in a deck like this, because you need a lot of trap cards in order to work. But there are a lot of good trap cards you can main deck in order to be able to break boards, and one of them is the 3 copies of Torrential Tribute. This card, especially in a deck that you can summon monsters during your opponent's turn whenever you want, you can let them fully commit to the board, even if they bring out negates. Sometimes it doesn't matter because of cards like Solemn Strike and Skill Drain. If they try to negate the Torrential, you can basically flip one of those to deal with the one negate your opponent has. They will lose their entire board, and they have used all the resources to make it, and they cannot make it again during main phase 2, most likely. So this is why this card is so good, and this is why we also play 3 copies of Needle Sealing, which is basically the same thing. But the thing about Needle Sealing is that it can sometimes be a little bit better than Torrential, true, because you don't really need to summon anything in order to trigger it. You can use it whenever you want, as long as your opponent or you have a lot of monsters on the field, which, come on, in this day and age, having 4 monsters on the field is very, very crucial. Now, the thing about maining these cards is going to make mirror matches a little bit worse, but I still think that you're required to play these cards because the mirror match is most likely a skill matchup and you have to outgrind your opponent. When you're playing against combo decks, if you don't have these cards in your deck and you're playing cards for mirror matches and back row type decks, you cannot really do much against combo decks, but even if you're maining these, you can still win mirror matches, which is why I think that you should be playing these in the main deck and have other cards that are going to be more useful in the side deck. We also play 3 copies of Solemn Strike. Again, it's another great trap card, which is also good going second, which is the trope of all the trap cards I'm playing. I've mentioned again, you need to be able to break your opponent's board with Needle Sealing and Torrential, and the good thing about cards like 3 copies of Skill Drain and 3 copies of Solemn Strike is that you can let your opponent make their entire board, even if they summon negates, and then you can use the board wipe trap card on combination with one of your negate trap cards to make sure you clear your opponent's board, because if you don't have one of these, then you're forced to use your board wipe trap cards before your opponent puts up a negate on the board, otherwise it's going to get negated. So you need to be able to use these cards in combination with each other in order to make the most out of them. We also played 2 copies of Trap Trick. This is here just to give us an 8th copy of Torrential and Needle Sealing, because 6, when I was testing before the ban list dropped, I was testing the deck even before because I said the deck, it was really good even beforehand, but now it's much, much better. But I just thought that 6 were not enough sometimes. So I thought that 2 copies of Trap Trick would not hurt. Yes, it's not that great if you're trying to pull the Eldlich combo with this card, because you can only activate 1 trap card afterwards. But if you activate Sanguine, then after it resolves, you activate this to set Yugioh. That can work, but it's not the most optimal play, but it's still an option. But most of the time, you're using this to set your Needle Sealing and your Torrential Tribute. And if you're playing other cards in the side deck that can be good in stuff like mirror matches, this card can be really useful, for example, with cards like Ice Dragon's Prison or Heavy Storm Duster, which you're going to be siding for other type control decks when you're facing them. Yeah, this card can give you more copies of your side deck cards, which is going to be very useful too. Now, the extra deck doesn't matter too much, to be honest, but there will be some times where some of these monsters do come up. And of course, you're going to play 3 copies of each because you're playing Extravagance and Prosperity in the same deck. So first off, we have 3 copies of Pleiades. Of course, you summon these with your Golden Light trap cards. It's another disruption and it's another body, which this deck sometimes desperately needs. 3 copies of Gustav. This card can help you win in time and can help you push for game because we also have 3 copies of Liebe. This combo is lethal, everybody knows it. If you can summon a rank 10 monster, then this provides you a very easy OTK potential, and especially in control decks, it's basically like people started playing Utopia Double sometime back in Sky Strikers. It's the same concept. You need something in the extra deck to help you pressure when you're playing a deck that doesn't do damage on its own very consistent. We have 3 copies of Zeus. Again, I'm going to mention it again. You don't really need to play all these cards because I know that not many people want to play 3 copies of Zeus in order to play Eldlich, and you don't have to. It's just something that might come up, but the word might just means that you can play pretty much a random extra deck of 15 monsters and you're still going to do fairly fine just because this deck does not need an extra deck. But Zeus, if it comes up, it's a monster that can be very, very useful. It's a light monster too, so sometimes even if you summon it and then you're under Gozen Match, you can still summon your Eldlich, which is another plus, and even nuking your entire board along with your opponents, you don't really mind because all your cards are going to float, so it helps you like that too. And we also play 3 copies of Vampire Sucker. Now, this card is going to be a very interesting tech in your extra deck that you can play if you play a lot of mirror matches, and I think that even if you don't play mirror matches, it's a great card to summon because you're not going to use any other Link monster, to be honest. The deck can already basically do anything that the Link 2 or lower monsters can already do on their own, so you're not going to summon anything more than a Link 2 in the deck, but this card helps you dig through your deck, and also it has a very good interaction with Gozen Match because if you summon this, and you give back one of your opponent's monsters to their side of the field, undergoes much when they have an empty field. If they're playing a deck different attributes and they don't want that monster on the field, then you can basically force them to enter at least the battle phase in order to try to crush it, so they can actually play during main phase 2. For example, you can give them back a Hand Trap, and then if they have an Ash Blossom in defense mode and it's a fire and they don't have a fire type deck, they won't be able to do anything under Gozen Match, so they'll be at least forced to switch this Ash Blossom to attack mode and crush it on Sacker in order to be able to play during main phase 2. And the effect to draw cards is always helpful in trap decks because you want to see as many cards as possible in order to be able to win most of your games. So it's a card that I've been enjoying, Eldlich, and I'm playing at 3, of course, because of the pod cards. So yep, that's the deck, guys. I think that you're going to be seeing this deck a lot more, so if you don't plan on playing Eldlich, then at least be prepared for it, because it's going to have a lot more representation than before, just because a lot of the good combo decks got severely hit, and this deck just got buffed because Imperial Order did not matter too much, but Skill Drain is a game changer. So yeah, you're going to be prepared for this, otherwise you're going to lose games, especially game 1, because your side deck definitely will have something for the trap decks, but you might even consider maining some stuff. So yep, that's the deck, guys. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming content. Stay tuned because we're going to update a lot of all the decks that got either hit or a buff from the ban list, and we're going to do them all very, very soon. We're going to give you new videos every single day. So if you enjoy these, stay tuned and we'll see you next time.